The college lecture hall buzzed with chatter as students settled into their seats. The professor, known for her bold opinions, smirked as she opened the day's discussion. She paced in front of the class, her voice dripping with amusement. "Today, we are talking about overpaid athletes who contribute nothing to society," she announced, pulling up an image on the projector. Stefon Diggs. The class chuckled, some shaking their heads. But before the professor could continue, a voice cut through the laughter. "That is funny," the voice said, calm yet firm, "because I am sitting right here." The room froze. The energy in the room shifted instantly. Students who had been laughing moments ago stiffened in their seats. Some turned their heads slowly, unsure if they had just imagined what they heard. The professor's smirk faltered as she glanced toward the back of the room. And there he was, Stefon Diggs, sitting casually in the last row, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. He had been in the room the entire time. Students gasped, nudging each other, whispering. A few reached for their phones, already sensing that this moment was about to become something much bigger. The professor cleared her throat, trying to maintain control. "Well," she said, forcing a smile, "I guess we have a special guest today." Diggs leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but firm. "Yeah, and I was not expecting a free comedy show." The students burst into muffled laughter. The professor's smile tightened. She folded her arms, trying to keep her authority intact. "I am simply making an academic point," she said smoothly. "Would you care to explain to my students why you deserve to be paid millions of dollars to chase a ball?" A few students snickered, clearly entertained by the unfolding confrontation. But Diggs did not blink. He had dealt with doubters before. This was nothing new. He exhaled, nodding slightly. "Sure," he said. "But before I answer that, let me ask you something." The professor raised an eyebrow. "Go ahead." Diggs tilted his head, his voice even, controlled, but sharp. "What have you done to inspire people lately?" The room fell into complete silence. The professor's expression froze for just a second. A few students widened their eyes. Others sat back, waiting, knowing that whatever was coming next would not be easily forgotten. The tension thickened. The power in the room had shifted completely. And for the first time since the class had started, the professor did not have an immediate answer. The professor's smile wavered, but she quickly masked it with an amused chuckle. She shook her head, as if Stefon Diggs' question was nothing more than a joke. "Inspire?" she repeated, crossing her arms. "I teach, Mr. Diggs. I educate the next generation. That is a little more valuable than running down a field for a paycheck, do you not think?" Some students shifted uncomfortably. A few chuckled, but others stayed quiet, sensing that this was not going to end the way the professor thought it would. Diggs leaned back in his chair, nodding slowly. "That is interesting," he said, "because I have been sitting here for 20 minutes, and the only thing you have taught them so far is how to judge people they do not even know." The room erupted in whispers. A few students murmured "wow" under their breath. The professor's lips pressed into a thin line. "You misunderstand me," she said, forcing a polite smile. "I am not judging you personally. I am making a point about professional athletes in general. You all make millions of dollars while teachers, first responders, and social workers struggle to make ends meet." She gestured toward the class, as if rallying them to her side. "What exactly do you contribute that justifies that kind of wealth?" A few students nodded in agreement, but others kept their eyes on Diggs, waiting for his response. Diggs let out a slow breath, completely unfazed. "You think we do not contribute?" he asked, tilting his head. "That is funny, because last month I was at a youth center mentoring kids who grew up with nothing. I donated money to rebuild a school. And last year I paid for multiple scholarships so kids who could never afford college could sit in a classroom just like this one." The professor's expression shifted. Diggs leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "So tell me," he said, his voice calm but sharp, "how many lives have you changed?" The professor opened her mouth, then closed it, because for the first time all semester, she was the one with nothing to say. The silence in the room was thick, heavy, almost suffocating. The professor's usual confidence was gone. She stared at Stefon Diggs, her lips parted slightly, searching for a response. But there was none. The students sat in stunned silence, their eyes darting between their professor and the NFL star who had just turned the entire discussion upside down. Diggs, however, was not done. "You see," he continued, his voice steady, never breaking eye contact. "People like you love to talk about how much athletes get paid, but you never talk about what we give back." The professor forced a chuckle, but it sounded hollow. "So what? You donate some money, take some pictures with kids, and suddenly you are changing the world?" Diggs smirked, not in amusement, in disbelief. "No," he said, "but showing up matters. Being there for people who have nothing matters." He gestured to the class. "Ask them. Ask how many of them grew up looking up to an athlete, someone who made them believe they could be more." The students shifted in their seats. One girl in the front row, who had been silent the entire time, suddenly raised her hand. The professor blinked, caught off guard. "Yes?" The girl took a breath, then looked at Diggs. "I grew up in a single-parent home," she said quietly. "My mom worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. I never thought I could go to college." She hesitated, then glanced at Diggs. "Then I saw people like you. People who came from nothing, who made it, who gave back. That is why I am here today." A few students nodded in agreement. The professor's face drained of color. Diggs leaned back, watching her. He did not need to say another word. The students were speaking for him now. The professor, realizing she was losing control, shook her head and exhaled sharply. "Well," she said stiffly, "I suppose everyone is entitled to their opinion." Diggs smirked, shaking his head. "No," he said, "some things are just facts." The room erupted in murmurs. Some students clapped quietly, others just sat there, staring at their professor, waiting for her to respond. But she had nothing. Diggs had just shut down the entire room. The professor's face was tight, her fingers curled around the edges of her desk. She was losing control of the room, and she knew it. She took a slow breath, forcing a thin smile as she looked back at Stefon Diggs. "Well," she said, "it is easy to throw money at problems. But real change? That takes more than just writing a check." A few students murmured in agreement, but others sat back, waiting to see what Diggs would say next. He let out a short chuckle, shaking his head. "See, that is the thing," he said. "People love to assume that all we do is throw money at problems." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. The screen lit up as he scrolled for a second. Then, he turned it around, holding it up for the class to see. On the screen were pictures, not of fancy cars, not of luxury vacations, but of Diggs at a youth center, playing football with kids. Another photo showed him at a community event, handing out backpacks filled with school supplies. Another one showed him sitting in a hospital room, talking with a child battling cancer. The room fell silent again. Diggs held the phone up for a moment longer, then slowly lowered it. "This," he said, his voice calm, steady, "is what I do." He tilted his head slightly. "So let me ask you again. What do you do besides sit here and judge?" The professor's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time in the entire exchange, she looked flustered. The students shifted in their seats. Some were nodding, others were whispering, and then, one by one, students started clapping. First, it was just a few, then more, and then the entire room was filled with applause. The professor sat there, stunned, her lips pressed together. Diggs glanced around the room, then leaned forward slightly. Class dismissed. The students laughed, clapping even louder. The professor could do nothing but sit there, watching as the room had fully turned against her. Diggs had done more than defend himself. He had exposed the truth. And the professor? She had no comeback left. The applause continued to ripple through the classroom. Some students clapped, others whispered to each other, and a few just stared at the professor, waiting, almost daring her to say something else. But she didn't. For the first time, she had no control over the room. Her authority, once unquestioned, had crumbled in front of everyone. She let out a sharp breath, forcing a tight smile. "Well," she said stiffly, "this has certainly been an interesting discussion." Diggs smirked. "Yeah, I would say so." The tension was thick, but Diggs wasn't angry. He had dealt with critics his whole life, people who thought athletes were just entertainers, people who assumed they had nothing to offer beyond the game. But today was different. Because today, he had proved them wrong, right to their faces. A student in the front row suddenly raised her hand. The professor, caught off guard, hesitated. "Yes?" The girl looked at Diggs. "If professional athletes don't contribute to society," she said, "then why do so many people look up to them?" The room fell silent again. The professor's lips parted slightly, as if she had a response ready, but then she hesitated. She had no answer. Diggs, however, did. He turned to the student, nodding. "Because we do more than just play. We inspire. We teach resilience. We show people that no matter where you start, you can win." More students nodded. Some even clapped again. The professor exhaled slowly, clearly realizing she had lost the room. Diggs glanced back at her, his voice calm but firm. "And for the record," he said, "I do not mind being called overpaid." He smiled, "Because every time I get paid, someone else benefits from it too." The class erupted into murmurs. Some students laughed, others whispered to each other. The shift was complete. Diggs grabbed his jacket, slung it over his shoulder, and took one last glance at the professor. "Next time," he said with a smirk, "maybe choose a different example." With that, he turned and walked out. And in that moment, the professor realized she had not just lost an argument, she had lost the respect of her own class. Stefon Diggs did not argue. He did not have to. His actions, his work, and his presence shut down every false narrative in that room. The professor had set out to mock him, but by the end, she was the one who had been exposed. Some people criticize from the sidelines. Others prove their worth through actions. Diggs? He let the truth speak for itself. What do you think? Should more athletes step up when they are unfairly criticized? Comment below, like, share, and subscribe for more powerful NFL stories.